The idea sounded like heresy, not against religion, but against philosophy itself. What if the mind, the thing humans had worshipped, protected, and mystified for centuries, was never a hidden inner ghost at all? What if it was a mistake? This was the question that made Gilbert Ryle dangerous, and this was the moment philosophy split in two. The quiet boy in a house of thinkers. Gilbert Ryle was born in 1900 in Brighton, England, not into wealth or power, but into ideas. Rare fact. His father was a physician who owned one of the largest private philosophy libraries in southern England, filled with banned and radical books. While other children played outside, Ryle wandered between shelves of logic, psychology, and metaphysics. Rare fact. Ryle learned Greek and Latin early, not for school, but because his father believed thinking begins with language. This environment didn't make Ryle loud or dramatic. It made him precise. Dangerously precise. Oxford didn't change him, it sharpened him. Ryle entered Oxford at a time when philosophy was still obsessed with the soul, consciousness, and inner mental realms. Rare fact, Ryle initially studied classics, not philosophy, a detail many overlook, which trained him to spot conceptual errors hidden inside language. He didn't argue emotionally. He dissected. Rare fact. Even as a student, Ryle was known for asking questions that ended discussions rather than starting them. He noticed something unsettling. Philosophers weren't disagreeing about reality. They were disagreeing because they were confused by words. This insight would later explode into one of the most influential philosophical attacks of the 20th century. The war that rewired his mind, then history intervened. World War II broke out, and Ryle didn't remain in lecture halls. Rare fact, Ryle worked in British military intelligence, analyzing enemy communication and deception tactics. This experience changed him forever. He saw how beliefs could be inferred from behavior, intentions could be detected without mind. Actions revealed more truth than inner declarations. Rare fact. Ryle later admitted that intelligence work convinced him that mental states are not hidden objects. They are patterns of behavior. The war didn't make him cynical. It made him ruthless with bad ideas. The philosophical crime nitrogen monoxide one noticed after the war. Philosophy returned to an old obsession. The mind is a thing inside the body, a private inner theater, a ghost controlling a machine. Ryle saw this as a catastrophic error. Rare fact. Ryle privately called this belief the most influential philosophical mistake since Plato. He argued that philosophers had committed what he named a category mistake, assigning something to the wrong logical category. To say the mind exists inside the body, Ryle argued, is like saying, "Where is the university?" After already seeing all the buildings, the university isn't another building. The mind isn't another thing. This idea would destroy centuries of assumptions. The book that shocked philosophy in 1949, Ryle published The Concept of Mind. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Rare fact. Some philosophers accuse Ryle of eliminating the mind entirely, calling him the man who murdered consciousness. But Ryle wasn't denying mental life. He was denying the myth. Rare fact. Ryle coined a phrase, the ghost in the machine. A phrase so powerful it escaped philosophy and entered global culture. His claim was devastatingly simple. Mental states are not hidden objects. They are ways of behaving, abilities, dispositions, and patterns. To believe, to intend, to feel, is not to possess an inner ghost, but to act in certain, intelligent ways. Why this terrified philosophers? Ryle wasn't just challenging, he was threatening. Psychology, theology, free will debates, the idea of a private inner self. Rare fact. Some theologians quietly celebrated Ryle, believing his work weakened materialism. Others condemned him for destroying the soul. Rare fact. Early cognitive scientists were divided. Some saw him as a genius, others as an obstacle to brain science. Ryle didn't care. He believed philosophy's job was not to comfort, but to clarify. The man behind the revolution, despite his intellectual violence, Ryle himself was reserved. Rare fact. Ryle never married and lived a deliberately simple life, believing distractions weakened. Thinking. Rare fact. He disliked being called a philosopher of mind. insisting he was a philosopher of concepts. As editor of the journal Mind, Ryle shaped an entire generation of analytic philosophy, quietly deciding which ideas survived and which disappeared. Without shouting, without spectacle, just precision. The shadow he cast by the end of this chapter. Something becomes clear. Gilbert Ryle didn't destroy the mind, he destroyed an illusion, and in doing so, he forced philosophy to confront an uncomfortable truth. Maybe the deepest mysteries of human life are not hidden inside us, but visible in what we do, and this was only the beginning. Because in the next chapter, Ryle's ideas collide with psychology, artificial intelligence, and the modern world, creating consequences no one saw coming. When philosophy collided with psychology, machines, and meaning, the problem with killing a ghost is this: people still swear they can see it. After the concept of mind was published, Gilbert Ryle didn't receive silence. He received resistance, not loud outrage, but a quiet, persistent refusal to let go of the idea that the mind was something hidden, private, and unreachable. Ryle had exposed a mistake, but mistakes don't disappear just because they're named. The battle with psychology in the 1950s. Psychology was racing in two opposite directions. On one side stood behaviorism, reducing humans to stimulus and response. On the other stood introspectionists, obsessed with inner mental images and private experiences. Ryle rejected both. In fact, Ryle publicly criticized strict behaviorism, insisting that intelligent behavior is not mechanical reaction, but skilled action, guided by understanding. He wasn't saying people lack minds. He was saying minds aren't objects. This subtle distinction confused many and infuriated others. Rare fact: Ryle refused to collaborate with psychologists who treated belief and desire as internal mental items, calling such language philosophical mythology. To Ryle, psychology was repeating philosophy's old mistake, just with laboratory equipment. A philosopher who hated theory, unlike many thinkers, Ryle distrusted grand systems. Rare fact: Ryle once joked that philosophers who build theories are like engineers who design bridges without checking where the river is. His philosophy wasn't about explaining everything. It was about removing confusion. This made him powerful and dangerous. Rare fact: Ryle's lectures were famous, not for answers, but for dismantling questions until students realized the problem never existed. Many left frustrated. Others left transformed. The secret war against dualism. Ryle's real enemy wasn't psychology. It was dualism, the idea that mind and body are two separate substances. He believed dualism survived not because it was true, but because it was comfortable. Rare fact: Ryle privately argued that dualism persists because humans fear responsibility. It allows people to blame an inner ghost instead of their actions. This insight made Ryle deeply controversial, because if the mind isn't a hidden thing, then excuses disappear. The unexpected influence on artificial intelligence decades before AI became a household word. Ryle's ideas quietly entered a new arena. Rare fact: early computer scientists referenced Ryle when debating whether machines could think. Ryle argued that intelligence is not something hidden inside a system. It is visible in what the system can do. This view influenced later functionalist theories, and indirectly shaped how programmers think about machine behavior today. Ryle never wrote about AI directly, but his shadow is there. The Oxford Empire. Ryle wasn't just a philosopher. He was a gatekeeper. Rare fact: as editor of the journal Mind for over 2 decades, Ryle shaped which ideas entered mainstream philosophy and which quietly vanished. He favored clarity over brilliance, precision over drama. Many famous philosophers were rejected by Ryle, not because they were wrong, but because they were unclear. This earned him enemies. Rare fact: some accused Ryle of suppressing continental philosophy and limiting philosophical diversity in Britain. Ryle responded simply: philosophy is not literature. The private man behind the public attacks. Despite his public reputation as a philosophical assassin, Ryle was intensely private. Rare fact: he avoided conferences whenever possible and preferred long walks to academic debate. Rare fact: Ryle believed that good philosophy should be written as plainly as possible and distrusted metaphors. Ironically, he became famous for one of the most powerful metaphors ever coined: the ghost in the machine, a metaphor he used to destroy metaphors. The limits of his revolution by the 1960s, criticism of Ryle intensified. Philosophers argued that he had gone too far, that by rejecting inner mental states, he ignored subjective experience. Rare fact, Ryle acknowledged these criticisms late in life, admitting that some aspects of consciousness might resist his analysis, but he never abandoned his central claim. Philosophy's job is not to explain minds, but to prevent us from misunderstanding them. This humility made him rare, and it made his legacy complex. The storm before the final quiet as cognitive science and neuroscience rose. Ryle watched from a distance. He didn't oppose brain science. He opposed bad philosophy. Rare fact, Ryle warned that neuroscience would inherit the same conceptual confusions unless philosophers remained vigilant. In his final years, he wrote less and observed more. The revolution he had started had taken on a life of its own, and the final question remained unanswered. If the mind is not a thing, then what exactly are we? That question waits in the final chapter, where Ryle's ideas face their ultimate test. Time itself, how one man changed the way we understand ourselves long after the arguments faded. Long after the lectures ended, Gilbert Ryle remained exactly what he had always been, a philosopher suspicious of noise. He didn't build a system. He didn't found a school. He didn't leave disciples repeating his words. Instead, he left behind something more unsettling, a permanent doubt. And in philosophy, doubt is a revolution. The man who refused to be a legend as Ryle aged, the world around him changed rapidly. Philosophy became louder, more theoretical, more specialized. He did not follow. Rare fact, Ryle refused honorary titles and avoided public celebrations of his work, believing philosophy should never become a personality cult. Rare fact, he declined invitations to write autobiographical reflections, calling them intellectual vanity. To the end, he believed philosophers should disappear behind their ideas. The late reckoning by the 1970s, new philosophers challenged Ryle openly. They argued that he had ignored inner experience, consciousness, and the subjective feel of being human. Ryle listened. Rare fact, in private correspondence, Ryle admitted that some mental phenomena resist behavioral analysis, though he insisted they still were not hidden objects. This quiet concession revealed something rare. He wasn't defending a doctrine. He was defending clarity. The philosopher who shaped Oxford, silently Ryle's greatest influence, wasn't a book. It was control. Rare fact, as Waynflete Professor of Metaphysical Philosophy at Oxford, Ryle shaped hiring, curriculum, and research priorities for decades. Entire philosophical careers were shaped by what Ryle encouraged or ignored. Yet he never used power to promote himself. Rare fact, Ryle actively promoted younger philosophers whose ideas conflicted with his own, as long as their arguments were clear. Clarity mattered more than loyalty. The final years, walking, thinking, watching in retirement, Ryle lived quietly. Rare fact, he took long solitary walks, daily, believing physical movement sharpened philosophical insight. Rare fact, he reread classical texts, not to agree or disagree, but to identify where thinkers confused language with reality. The ghost was always there, waiting to return. Death without drama. Gilbert Ryle died in 1976. There were no grand final statements, no philosophical last words. Rare fact, his funeral was small, private, and intentionally unremarkable, exactly as he wanted. He left no disciples to chant his name, no school to defend him. Just arguments, the afterlife of an idea, and yet Ryle's influence only grew. Modern philosophy of mind still begins with his challenge. Are we describing reality, or are we confused by our language? Rare fact, contemporary debates in consciousness, artificial intelligence, and cognitive science still reference Ryle's category mistake, often without naming him. Rare fact, the phrase "the ghost in the machine" is now used globally in science, culture, and technology, often without awareness of its origin. That may have pleased him. The philosophical warning that still matters. Ryle's greatest contribution wasn't a theory. It was a warning. When we misunderstand concepts, we create false problems, and then we spend centuries trying to solve them. He believed many philosophical mysteries were self-inflicted wounds. The final question: if the mind is not a thing inside us, not a secret place, not a ghost pulling levers, then what are we? Ryle's answer was quiet, almost disappointing. We are what we do, what we know how to do, how we respond, how we act intelligently in the world. Not heathen, not mysterious, visible. And that idea may be more unsettling than any ghost. Final image: imagine philosophy after Ryle. Quieter, sharper, less mystical. More careful. A philosophy that doesn't chase shadows, but turns on the light. Gilbert Ryle didn't kill the mind. He removed the fog around it, and in doing so, he changed how thinking thinks about itself.